Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has sent another letter reiterating that debt limit measures may be exhausted as soon as June 1st. This is a letter that the Treasury Department has sent to Kevin McCarthy. He is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, following up on her previous discussion about the X state, reiterating that if Congress has not acted to raise or suspend the debt limit by early June and potentially as early as June 1st, the Treasury will likely no longer be able to satisfy all of the government's obligations. We do want to get back down to Kailey Leinz, our person in Washington, co-host of Balance of Power. Is there anything else new in this letter, Kailey, that we're learning beyond the X state?
Well, of course, we aren't necessarily learning anything new with the X date other than that Janet Yellen is really doubling down on what potentially the window is here. But she does have language in this letter, Romaine, talking about the idea of cutting it too close. She said they have learned from past debt limit impasses that waiting until the last minute to suspend or increase the debt limit can have serious harm to businesses and consumer confidence. This all comes back to the idea as well as the potential threat of a downgrade, Romaine, even if you get just too close to the X date and don't, as we saw in the 2011 episode when it was weeks before the X date that this happened. But again, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen saying that it still could be as early as June 1st. And perhaps this really lights a fire under the negotiators and the White House and congressional leaders as they get set to meet once again tomorrow.
I think it's interesting in this letter. She also mentions, I think, what anyone who has a Bloomberg terminal already knows. In her words, borrowing costs for early June debt have risen. And we've been talking a lot about that on this show. When you look at 4-week bills, 8-week bills, basically anything that goes out into June, July, August, you're talking about 5.5%, maybe even more, for debt that, quite frankly, was priced at about 3% just a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point, and you have to be watching the markets as well for whether or not that ultimately puts pressure on Kevin McCarthy, on President Biden, because we have been watching some areas of the market, specific points of the Treasury curve in which you already are starting to see the angst around the debt ceiling showing up. When perhaps the equity markets start paying more attention, Romaine, maybe that makes things a little bit more urgent when constituents start to be keeping track of the headlines and what's happening with their 401k. But obviously the Treasury market very key to focus on in this moment, because this is already a time in which borrowing costs have gone up substantially. And if something were to happen to the United States' credit rating, or ultimately there would be a default, in theory, all of that would just be exacerbated to even a further extent.
And just real quickly, towards the end of this, she actually does talk about the potential severe hardship, Kailey, for American families. The idea that this isn't just about financial markets being hurt, that there could be some potential economic consequences for everyday folk.
Yeah, and it comes back to the idea of the borrowing costs, right? That the interest you'd be paying if you wanted to take out a car loan or a mortgage would be substantially higher. But she goes even beyond just what would happen to the American people domestically, Romaine. She also says it could harm the U.S.'s global leadership position and even the ability to defend national security interests. So clearly very much trying to underscore the severity of this potential situation, encouraging Congress once again at the end of the letter to protect the full faith and credit of the United States and act as soon as possible.